another word problem. This one, yeah, it gets kind of fun because this is going to be a two-part word problem. First part is this. We have a club, not the Girl Scouts, but they sell cookies anyway, to raise money for their camping trips. This year they sold 832 boxes of cookies. And they sell two types. They sell the plain Janes and they sell the Fancy Nancy's. Now the plain Janes cost $1.25 a box. The Fancy Nancy's cost $3.50 a box. And they raised $1,760 this year. Not bad. So let's see how many they sold of each type this year. Well, we know that the plain Janes and the Fancy Nancy's equaled 832 boxes. That's the total. We also know this. We know that for each plain Jane they charged $1.25. And that for each Fancy Nancy they charged $3.50. And that the total of those sales equals $1,760. So we want to find out how many Janes they sold and how many Nancys they sold. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to solve for either N or J. It doesn't matter. I'm going to pick to solve for J here. So this means that N equals 832 minus J. Well, how about that? I wound up solving for N, not J. Doesn't matter. So now I have this. I have 1.25 J plus 3.50 times 832 minus J, and that equals 1,760. Great. So now I'm going to use distribution. Well, and I'm going to use my handy dandy calculator because I can't do that in my head. I do know this much. I have 1.25J minus 3.50J plus, what have I got? What have I got? What have I got? I now have 832 times 3.50. And that equals 2,000, how do I get this to work? 2,912. So 2,912. And that total there equals 1,760. Well, I combine these two and I subtract this one. So I subtract 2,912 from both sides. And 350 minus 1.25 equals 2.25. A negative 2.25, by the way. J. Okay? I'm going to want to put that in the next line, not this line here. And 1760 minus 2912 equals a negative 1152. So far, so good. Now I'm going to divide both sides by negative 225. And negative over negative becomes a positive. And that equals, J now equals 512 boxes of the plain Janes. So you have 512 boxes of the plain Janes. Okay, so we're going to change this little number right here. Let's say 512. We could also say 512 over here. So we know now that we have 832 minus 512 equals the number of Fancy Nancys. And the number of Fancy Nancys equals 320. So now we have Jane's equal 512, Nancy's equal 320, and that's how many cookies we sold to make $1,760. No hocus pocus here. I just set the problem up correctly in the first place with Jane plus Nancy equal 832, of which I solved for n, substituted 832 minus j every place I saw an n, did distribution, okay, move that 2912 over to the other side and did my subtraction, came up with 1152 and divided by 225. Great. Now, next year we know that camping is going to cost us $2,000. So, it's going to cost us more. So we're going to have to raise the price on our Fancy Nancys because we just can't. We know people love the Fancy Nancys. They're never going to stop buying them. They love them Fancy Nancys. We're going to sell just as many plain Janes, I'm sure. But we're going to sell just as many Fancy Nancys too. Well, we know that the Janes cost $1.25, and we sold 512 of them. We're going to raise the price on the Fancy Nancys, but we don't know to how much. So we're going to have a new price. And we knew that we had 320 boxes of Fancy Nancys sold, and that must now equal $2,000 next year. So that's no longer necessary. And so we just solve for this. Well, 1.25 times 512, that equals $640, plus P times 320 must equal 2,000. So I'm going to subtract 640 from both sides. Remember all of this. And that equals $1,360. So 320 boxes of Fancy Nancys. So 1360 divided by 320 will equal, whoops, I did something wrong there, 1,360 boxes of Fancy Nancys divided by 320 equals, the new price is going to be $4.25. So hold on to your hats. Your Fancy Nancys are going up next year by 75 cents so the girls can go camping a little more, maybe a little longer, maybe a little more expensive. But, so we just did substitution. We just plugged things in and kept plugging away at it. The reason I picked this one, you have a problem very similar to this on your quiz and probably on your test, where what you do first is you find out how much each ticket costs, knowing that how many of each ticket we sold, knowing how many we sold total. We know how much each ticket cost and how much the theater owner made. We know that he wants to raise ticket prices next year, so he makes a new amount of money. So this is a very similar problem. Follow it through. Stop the video whenever you have to.